My brother's name was on the settlement papers before I even finished reading them. I watched him sign, pen moving fast, like he'd been waiting for this moment his whole life. Our family's attorney sat at the head of the table, calm and practiced. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue. My father nodded slowly, the way he does when he believes something is finally right. Nobody looked at me, not once, and I let it happen. What none of them understood yet was that I had spent 3 years quietly learning exactly what they were taking. The letter from my brother's attorney arrived on a Friday afternoon. I remember because I was meal prepping for the week, cutting bell peppers at the kitchen counter, half listening to a podcast about financial planning. I wiped my hands on a dish towel before I opened it. The language was polite, the way legal language always is measured, formal, stripped of the emotion underneath. But the meaning was clear. My brother was claiming that our grandmother's bakery, the one I had been running for the past 3 years, rightfully belonged to him under the terms of a verbal agreement made before our grandmother passed. I set the letter on the counter and stood very still for a long moment. The bakery wasn't just a business. It was a corner property on a street my grandmother had watched change for 40 years. She had opened it when she was 26, younger than I am now, with flour on her apron and a loan she paid off in 4 years. She taught me to laminate dough when I was 9. She let me run the register when I was 12. When her knees got bad and my parents suggested she slow down, she called me first. Not my brother, not my cousins, me. I moved back to our hometown at 22, fresh out of a hospitality program and with no savings to speak of. I didn't move back for the bakery. I moved back for her. She was declining faster than anyone admitted, and the shop needed someone who understood both the kitchen and the books. I stepped into that role without asking for a title or a salary negotiation. I just showed up every morning and did the work. By the time our grandmother passed, 18 months later, I had restructured the supplier contracts, trained 2 new part-time employees, updated the point-of-sale system, and quietly paid 3 months of back utilities from my own account when the estate was frozen during probate. I didn't tell anyone that last part. It didn't feel like something that needed announcing. It felt like something that needed doing. The bakery came to me through her will. Clearly, specifically, with legal documentation drawn up by a proper estate attorney 6 months before she died. My brother had been named in the will too. He received her car, her jewelry collection, and a sum of money from her savings account. He signed the probate documents. He cashed the check. Then, 14 months later, he hired an attorney. His claim was simple and, I had to admit, strategically written. He argued that our grandmother had promised him the bakery in conversation, that my presence there had been intended as temporary management, and that I had used my proximity to her in her final months to influence the terms of her will. That last part was the one that stayed with me at night. I found my attorney through a referral from a woman I knew at my morning farmer's market route. His office was on the 2nd floor of a building that also housed a tax preparation service and a notary. He was thorough, unhurried, and direct. When he finished reading through everything I brought him, he leaned back and said, "This claim has very little substance. You have documentation on your side. The will is clean." The probate was completed without objection. Then he paused. "But," he said, "it's your brother. And it's your grandmother's name on the door. That changes how juries feel even when the law doesn't change." He was right about that. I could already feel it in my family. My mother had started calling less. My father, when I did speak with him, was careful with his words in a way that meant he was choosing sides and hadn't landed yet. My brother, meanwhile, was telling a version of events that traveled faster than mine because it was simpler and it cast him as someone wronged. The first mediation session was held in a beige conference room with a water pitcher nobody touched. My brother arrived with his attorney and a posture I hadn't seen on him before, stiff, prepared, performing. He didn't look at me directly. He looked slightly past me. The way you look at someone you've already decided isn't worth the full attention. His attorney laid out the verbal agreement claim with practiced confidence. She had clearly coached him well. He spoke about our grandmother with warmth, describing memories I recognized but had lived differently. He mentioned the bakery the way you mention something you always expected to be yours, not something you built, something you were owed. When it was my turn to speak, I was quiet. My attorney presented the documentation, the will, the probate records, the financial history, 3 years of tax filings under my management, supplier agreements in my name, the utility receipts I had almost left at home. My attorney wanted those last documents. He said they showed continuity of care. I handed them over without commentary. My brother's attorney glanced at the utility receipts and moved on quickly. I noticed that. Mediation ended without resolution. My brother wanted full ownership or a buyout at a number his attorney named that made my attorney press his pen against his notepad without writing anything. We left without agreement, and with a court date 6 weeks out. That evening I sat in the bakery after close. I do that sometimes, turn off the display lights, leave just the kitchen fluorescents on, and sit at the work table where my grandmother used to roll croissant dough at 5 in the morning. The smell of the place is different at night, quieter, more like memory than commerce. I had a decision to make and I knew it. My attorney was ready to fight. He had the documentation, the financial history, the estate attorney on record who could speak to my grandmother's capacity and intent when she wrote her will. He believed we would win. He told me so plainly, without false comfort. But I had started thinking about something else, something I hadn't mentioned to him yet. In the months after my grandmother died, while I was managing the estate alongside the bakery operations, I had gone through every file cabinet in the back office. My grandmother was meticulous. Folders labeled in her neat handwriting, lease agreements, equipment warranties, vendor contacts, and in the back of the second drawer, a manila envelope I had initially set aside and later read carefully. It contained a set of agreements she had made with the building's original owner 30 years ago. The property the bakery occupied wasn't owned outright. It was under a long-term commercial lease with a series of clauses attached: maintenance responsibilities, required annual inspections, a first right of refusal clause that had to be actively renewed every 5 years, and a provision that tied certain operational standards to the lease terms. My grandmother had managed all of this without difficulty because she understood it inside and out. She had renewed the right of refusal twice. The next renewal was due in 11 months. I had already begun preparing for it. My brother had not asked about any of this during the mediation. His attorney had not requested the full operational file. They had focused on ownership on the name in the will, on the verbal claim without asking what ownership of this particular property actually required. I thought about that for a long time at the work table that night. I thought about my grandmother's voice, low and precise, the way she explained things when she wanted to make sure you understood. She used to say that a business isn't a trophy, it's a relationship. With your suppliers, your landlord, your neighborhood, your customers, you don't inherit a relationship. You earn it every day, or you lose it. The week before the court date, my attorney and I sat down and I told him everything about the lease agreements. He read through what I brought him carefully. Then he looked up. "You never mentioned this before. You never asked what running the bakery actually involved," I said. "You asked whether I had legal ownership. Those are different questions." He was quiet for a moment. "This doesn't change our case," he said finally. "You still win on the will alone." "I know," I said. He studied me. "But you're thinking about something else." "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that I don't want to spend the next year of my life in a legal fight with my brother over something he hasn't earned and doesn't understand. And I'm thinking that reality has a way of surfacing on its own if you stop standing in front of it." My attorney sat back. He didn't agree with what he thought I was suggesting. He told me so, clearly and professionally. He walked me through the risks precedent, family narrative, public record, the possibility that giving an inch would be read as an admission. He wasn't wrong about any of it. I listened. I didn't waver. "I need to understand what you want," he said at the end. "I want to stop being the person who has to explain themselves to people who've already decided who I am," I said. "I want the truth to land without me pushing it." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen. "Okay," he said, "then let's make sure everything is done correctly." The courtroom was smaller than I expected for how large it had felt in my imagination over the preceding months. Wood benches, fluorescent lighting, the particular stillness of a room where nothing is decided quickly. My brother sat across the aisle with his attorney. He looked confident in a way that seemed recently acquired, like a posture he'd been practicing. My attorney spoke carefully, almost minimally. He presented the will, the probate record, the documentation. He did not grandstand. He did not dramatize. My brother's attorney was more theatrical. She built a narrative around sentiment and family expectation, around a grandmother who loved both of her grandchildren, and surely couldn't have meant to divide them like this. When it came to the agreement portion, I signed where I was directed to sign. My attorney had made sure the transfer paperwork was complete and accurate. My brother's expression when the papers were finalized was the same as my father's had been, the particular relief of someone who believes they have reclaimed something that was always theirs. Their attorney was gathering her files when she paused. It was the lease renewal documentation that stopped her. My attorney had included the full operational file as part of the transfer, as was proper. She was flipping through it the way you flip through something you expect to be routine, and then she wasn't flipping anymore. The judge had already adjourned. People were standing, moving toward the exit. My brother was saying something to my father in a low, satisfied voice. Their attorney was still reading. I watched her turn back 2 pages, then 3, her finger tracing a line of text I knew by heart. I didn't say anything. I picked up my bag and walked out. My attorney caught up with me in the hallway. He touched my elbow lightly. She found the renewal clause. I know. Your brother has 11 months. I know. He walked beside me toward the exit without speaking for a moment. Then he said quietly, I've been practicing law for 14 years. I don't think I've ever seen someone do that deliberately. I didn't do anything, I said. I just stopped carrying it alone. The call from my brother came 9 days later. I was at the bakery, an hour before opening, checking the morning delivery against the invoice. I almost didn't answer. I answered. I need to talk to you, he said. His voice was different. The performance was gone. Okay, I said. Our attorney says there's a renewal coming up. For the lease. Yes, I said. She says if it's not handled correctly, we could lose the right of first refusal, that the whole lease structure could be at risk. That's accurate, I said. A pause. Did you know about this when we were in court? I set down the invoice. I've known about it for 2.5 years. I've been preparing for the renewal since last fall. The silence on his end stretched long enough that I heard street noise behind him. A car door, someone calling a name. Why didn't you say anything? He finally asked. You didn't ask what running the bakery involved, I said. You asked who owned it. Those are different questions. Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. I don't know how to do any of this. I know you don't, I said. Not unkindly, just honestly. I heard him exhale. What do I do? I told him I would send him a full summary of the lease structure, the renewal timeline, the compliance requirements, and the name of the property manager he needed to contact. I told him what the annual inspection involved. I told him what the operational standards clause meant in practice. I gave him every piece of information I had spent 3 years accumulating. I did not offer to do it for him. That boundary felt important, not as punishment, as clarity. The weeks that followed were strange in the way that quiet is strange after a long period of noise. No court dates, no attorney calls. Just the bakery in the morning and my own life in the afternoon, and a slow, incremental shift in how my family spoke to me. My mother called more. At first, the conversations were careful, circling the subject without landing on it. Then one evening she said, simply, I didn't know how much you were doing over there. I didn't rush to respond. I let it settle between us. I never hid it, I said finally. I just didn't make you watch. She was quiet. That's not the same as us seeing it. No, I agreed. It's not. My father was harder. He is a man who experiences being wrong as a physical thing, something that has to move through him slowly before he can speak about it. About 6 weeks after the court date, he stopped by the bakery on a Saturday morning, earlier than the usual opening. I let him in through the back. He stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at everything the way you look at a place when you're trying to understand how much work it holds. He picked up one of my grandmother's laminated recipe cards, the ones I'd had preserved under a small frame by the oven. He held it carefully. She would have told us, he said finally. If she thought we needed to know. I understood what he meant. He meant about the lease, about the complexity, about how much I'd taken on. He was reaching, in his own language, toward something like acknowledgement. She trusted me to handle it, I said. So I did. He set the card down gently. He didn't apologize. My father isn't built for direct apology. But he helped me unpack the morning delivery without being asked, and he stayed for 2 hours, and before he left, he said, You run a good place. From him, that was everything. My brother and I didn't speak again for almost a month after that first call. When he called the second time, it was with a specific question about the right of first refusal clause, what exactly constituted a qualifying offer under the agreement's terms. I answered him. He thanked me. We talked for 20 minutes about the bakery, not about the lawsuit, and it was the longest real conversation we'd had in years. He is struggling with the operational requirements. I know this not because he tells me, but because he has started asking questions that tell me where the gaps are. He didn't understand that the annual inspection required documentation of equipment maintenance logs. He didn't know the supplier contracts had 90-day termination clauses that needed active management. He didn't know that the neighborhood association had a noise ordinance that affected early morning delivery windows, and that my grandmother had negotiated a specific exception that had to be maintained through relationship, not paperwork. These things don't come with the deed, they come with years of showing up. I answer his questions when he asks. I don't volunteer information he hasn't sought. That might sound cold written down, but it doesn't feel cold in practice. It feels like the first honest dynamic we've had in a long time. He's learning to ask. I'm learning to answer without resentment. That is not nothing. What I carry now is lighter than what I carried before. Not because the work has changed. I still run the morning farmers market route, still manage my own accounts, still do the work my grandmother taught me. But the weight of being unseen has lifted in a way I didn't expect. When you stop waiting to be recognized by the people who have already decided your story, you discover how much energy that waiting was costing you. There are things I wish I had done differently. I wish I had been more explicit, earlier, about what I was contributing financially. Not to keep score, but to create shared understanding before it became contested territory. Silence, I've learned, is not the same as peace. It can look identical from the outside and feel completely different once the silence breaks. I also wish I had understood sooner that my brother's claim was never really about the bakery. It was about something older and harder, to name the particular grief of a sibling who watches the other one chosen, even when the choosing was earned. That doesn't make what he did right, but it makes it human. And understanding that has made it easier to stand in the same room with him without carrying the lawsuit like a stone between us. My grandmother's recipe cards are still on the wall by the oven. I added 2 new ones this year, things I developed on my own, not hers, mine. That felt right in a way I didn't anticipate, like the place was becoming something continuous rather than something preserved. Ownership isn't a finishing line. It's a daily choice, made in early mornings and late nights, in the maintenance logs and the supplier calls and the relationships built over years with the people who make a small business run. You can be handed a deed. You cannot be handed the understanding of what the deed actually means. What I want to say to anyone listening who has been quietly carrying more than their share in a family business, in a household, in a relationship where the work is invisible until someone else wants credit for the outcome, is this: your work is documented even when it isn't announced. Reality keeps its own records. You don't have to fight loudly for the truth to eventually surface. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step back and let people discover the weight of what you are holding. I still open the bakery every morning at 5. I still make my grandmother's croissants on Saturdays. The corner smells the same as it did when I was 9 years old, standing on a step stool to see over the counter. Some things don't change when they're built right. That's the part worth protecting. Not the deed, the dailiness. That was always the point. If this story stayed with you, I'd be glad if you shared it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more stories about quiet strength, real choices, and the complicated grace of family, you're welcome to subscribe. Thank you for being here.